Welcome everyone to the Vol Performance online workshop series. Really excited to bring tonight the finisher to a really prominent leadership series that Vol Performance have put together. For those of you who haven't seen any of the Vol Performance online workshop series, the goal of this series is to facilitate creative discussions and enable practitioners to share ideas, experiences, and best practices within a high performance and sports medicine setting. The online series has really tried to feature some of the world's foremost leaders in high performance sport and rehabilitation to help to build our knowledge and our experience in this area. And tonight is no different, with a round table with a focus on discussing leadership as it is in the current uncertain circumstances in today's climate. I'm going to allow each of these individuals to introduce themselves.
Well, what some might say, played the greatest sport on the planet in AFL footy, Aussie rules. So that's my background, former life as a player, recruited as a 16-year-old, retired at the age of 33, 34, was exposed to leading teams as a player back in about 94, 95, and really resonated the model, the high performing teams model really resonated with me. And so I've had a long association as a participant, a player, then joined leading teams full time in about 2007, and I've been full time ever since. Now a director, partner, and the chairman of leading teams. So I've had a long term investment in the leading teams model.
Yeah, fantastic, Justin. I really look forward to your insight today. Dan from Cut Through Coaching, if you can introduce yourself to the group.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Dan Hasler, and originally from Manchester in the UK, but now I live in Sydney, Australia. Originally, I played the greatest game of all, a bit of rugby league. I played a little bit of rugby league at Warrington, and then injury got the better of me, and I became a PE teacher. And I taught PE for a long time before getting a scholarship here in Australia to look at well-being in education. That was an interesting journey. It enabled me to meet lots of interesting people and speak at lots of interesting events. And by a lot of, serendipity or whatever, just started working with lots of sports organizations, predominantly to start within their pathways systems. But then eventually the stuff we were talking around well-being, leadership, mindset, started filtering through to the first grade playing groups and the coaching staff there. So currently we work with one NRL club in particular quite closely, a couple others more broadly, but we also work across Tennis Australia, Institute of Sport, Netball Australia, Gymnastics Australia, as well as working in the corporate sector and our education background as well, still in schools, but all around that sort of synergy between well-being, engagement, leadership and mindset. So that's me.
Fantastic.
And thank you very much for the invite to be here, Selwyn. Much appreciated.
No, it's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And our next two panelists come from Ulster Rugby with high recommendation from a couple of people in high performance sport, in Dan McFarland and Tom Clough. Dan, if you want to introduce yourself to the group.
I'll echo what Dan just said. Thanks very much for having me on, Selwyn. I'd really like to be able to say that I played the greatest sport in the world, but Tom Clough is following me, who's another rugby league fanatic. So I'll avoid that. I'm currently head coach of Ulster Rugby. Prior to that, I was assistant coach with Scotland Rugby and then Glasgow Warriors before that. Prior to that, I was a player and a coach at Connacht Rugby, having finished off a very average professional rugby career. I'm really pleased to be here. Selwyn's introduced us as experts. I'm 18 months as a head coach, so I always have to clarify that I'm a relative baby in the world of leading as a head coach.
And probably commenting that Dan's probably underestimating his experience and his knowledge in this area, but we'll come on to some of those good ideas that he does have. So I'm a rugby league background as well, an even poorer player Then Dan, injury got the better of me, as it does with a lot of people, and I kind of transferred into strength and conditioning as a passion of mine. Although thinking back to when I did play, it wasn't a passion at all. So yeah, that's my background. Kind of Bradford Bulls as a rugby league club, where I cut my cloth in the academy and then in the senior team, and then Hull Kingston Rovers, a little bit of a spot of part-time lecturing in between jobs, and then fortunately enough for me, Dan took a chance on me to come into rugby union, which I'm learning to love as well.
Well, I'll jump in, Selwyn. I guess the work that we do at Leading Teams is predominantly with teams, but ultimately they are led by leaders, and so our focus shifts to leaders pretty quickly with the work that we do. It's interesting, when I'm working with leadership teams, I'll ask that question that you just asked me around, what's their most admired leadership quality, and when you put the list up of their responses, there's a really strong theme. And while there is some recognition that people admire a leader's ability to know their stuff and be knowledgeable and have expertise, overwhelmingly the characteristics that people nominate, the things that they gravitate towards from a leadership perspective is leaders, or are leaders who build, they build relationships, they engage, they're interested, they show empathy, they're trustworthy, they're good for their word, they're genuine, they role model, they create a safe environment, they're good communicators, they're open to feedback, and ultimately they allow the people that they've employed to come in and do their jobs that they've been employed to do. And so I've found over the years that list doesn't change too dramatically. Most people want the same sort of things in their leaders. And I'm the same. The things that I admire are leaders that are genuine and open, honest, fair, but firm, and are prepared to roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty when needed. So, I found that to be quite a common theme with the things that I've just listed there.
Yeah, fantastic. Dan, do you have anything to add to those characteristics?
So I'm assuming you mean this Dan, not Dan, the other Dan.
Yeah,
so, yeah. I mean, I think for me, the word that the word or the trait, the characteristic is that humility, which we sort of think around. What is it to be humble and have that humility? And we talk about it because humble sometimes, I don't know, some people, particularly blokes, can have a negative connotation about that. But when we reframe being humble is essentially having the confidence not to be a dickhead, an arrogant, I know everything. And so that humility to recognize that, and this is a well-worn quote in the corporate world, but what got you to the position you're in now is no longer enough. So this one particular club we're working with is, and this is what this work is all around. The coach has got the job based on what he has done, and we're sitting there talking, and he goes, no one's told him, shown him what he now has to do, and all those other factors, that phenomenon that comes in. For example, the person who gets appointed head of sales in a corporate scenario, they got that because they're a good salesperson. And all the man management and people management stuff, a lot of the time they have to learn that on the job. And if people don't have that humility to recognize that, it's an uphill struggle. So for me, humility is kind of like that foundation. And then, I mean, obviously echoing everything Justin said. I mean, if you could sort of pack it all that up and distill it into a leadership pill, you'd be onto good stuff.
Yeah, very, very good point. Dan McFarlane, you have been an assistant coach in a number of organisations, now taking over that head coach role. With the characteristics you've seen in coaches you've worked under, have you tried to employ some of that in your current role, or are there things that you've also learnt that that's not the sort of leader I want to be once I'm a head coach?
Yeah, I think I suppose I'll start by saying that I have a slightly different view to the old world, and I agree with some of the behaviors that the guys are talking about there, you know, we all see those in people we want to follow. I come at it from a slightly different perspective, in that I don't see it as a defined set of common characteristics, because leadership is so contextual. You know, that might upset a lot of people. On the particularly on the Vol podcast, as we all know that you guys love a sexy set of data, but measuring characteristics with psychometric tests and hoping that a great leader pops out at the end of it, that's old school. You know, that it leads to that special something we're looking for in the cult of leadership, and you know, I just don't buy that. You know, if you're asking me what makes great leadership, you know, that's a much better question to answer. And for me, that's about understanding context. You know, it's about providing clarity. You know, providing clarity around a pathway and a vision that you're trying to achieve, and fostering creativity and initiative. Spanning all of those three things, or those three things, comes that relatedness and that ability to be able to relate to people, and the ability to be able to adapt for a leader, or to understand the social and the contextual issues that they're being placed in, is imperative. You don't have trust, for instance, within those social and contextual elements, you got no chance whatsoever.
I think you bring a great point there, in that ability to adapt to the situation and being contextual. Have you and Tom found that with the current situation, you've had to adapt how you've addressed your staff and your playing group, or have you tried to maintain the same themes and that same vision as if they were there with you day in, day out?
I'll jump in, Tom. Sorry, mate. No, that's a really good question, because I think that like, you know, the first thing that comes to mind when something like this hits you and something so different is you got to stop the compass spinning, haven't you? You know, there's so much uncertainty out there, and there's so many people who are not exactly sure where they stand. And the bottom line is, you don't have all the answers, but you've got to address that uncertainty and give clarity of purpose and pathway. And the first question for me around that is, has our purpose changed? You know, are we an organization that ultimately wants to achieve something different? Well, the answer is no. You know, we're all positive. We're all positive we're going to get through this. So no. The way we go about that, in the practicalities of the way we go about, yes, that does change. And there are certain things that you refocus on within the way that we've worked at things. We have three key strands to our culture in Ulster. When we're on the pitch and we're playing week in, week out, there is one of those that is predominant and preeminent, and we focus on that. We don't focus on that now. So we've almost flipped our culture, not in terms of the way that we go about it, but the little aspects of it that we focus on. The example is, staying connected has become the number one thing. And we know that across the board in this area, most companies or most businesses are doing that. But making sure that the mechanics of staying connected are up and running has become our predominant theme at the moment. And that is slightly adjusting at the moment, but that has been for the last while. And then sensing whether that is going on, you know, that's the difficult thing. Geez, you know, it's great talking on this platform, but you just don't get a feel, do you? You know, you've really got to talk to people a lot to be able to sense the mood in the room.
Yeah, from a management perspective, from your experience, Tom, how have you found that, as what Dan was alluding to in regards to managing the mechanic side, but then how do you know whether your staff are actually maintaining engagement and or feeling motivated with the current situation?
I think you've just got to acknowledge that it's okay to not be motivated in certain times and certain stages. And I think if you're in that constant communication in a variety of formats, and different people are having those communication channels with players or with staff, then in a roundabout way, if you're an organisation that cares, you're going to start to pull out themes, and you'll start. You know, we we have a head count system. You know, we'll comment on people if we think there's issues there, or someone's disconnected, or someone's behaviour's changed slightly, or the social media is slightly different. You know, we will comment, but we'll go to the group and we'll find out, you know, exactly what's going on. We'll get perspective on that. So I think just clarity of message, and once people know exactly what they're doing and you're removing some of that anxiety, then it's about really, I find actually these kind of Zoom calls really engaging and actually quite fatiguing, because you have to really listen and connect with people. And sometimes when you're in an office place and you're having those conversations, you know, there's all sorts going on. And do you really engage, or are you looking off in different directions and someone's coming in and interrupting? So, you know, there's benefits as well. So I think you've got to make the best of the situation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Justin, did you have something to add there?
I just wanted to jump in there. I think, certainly from my experience internally at leading teams, but also some of the work that we're doing with our clients, is that, you know, we've had to jump into the Zoom world. I've never, up until the pandemic, didn't even know Zoom existed, and now I do it. My calendar's full of Zoom invites. But from an internal perspective, our relationships are so strong. Levels of trust are high. We're engaged, empowered environment. So we've been able to adapt to the mechanics of Zoom, if you like, as an example, pretty easily. And so while everyone can have a bad day and perhaps, you know, struggling when they've woken up in the morning, because we've invested so heavily in our relationships and we've had lots and lots of conversations prior to this pandemic, I think we're internally quite good at picking up when someone's perhaps not quite at their best or isn't quite as engaged. And so for us, we've just transferred our relationships and strength of relationships and our willing to be open and honest with each other, and the questions that we ask and the interest and the care that we show. And we've just been able to plonk it into this mechanic of the Zoom meeting. Flip side of that is, if you're a team or if you've got relationships that aren't where they need to be, then all of a sudden you're expecting people to engage in Zoom. Well, then you're up against it right from the start. And so it's the work that you've done before you get into these crises or these times of uncertainty, or when you're really under pressure and your back's against the world. If you haven't done that work up front, not impossible, just makes it a bit more difficult when you've got to adapt from a mechanics point of view.
That's an interesting point, because it's evident that Dan and Tom, you guys have a strong, I guess, network within Ulster, and you've obviously worked within the organisation to create kind of that trust and relationships. Dan Hazler, when with this component of uncertainty and sometimes with also people working away and having to work from home, there possibly is a fear of identity loss associated with not being able to be in your workplace or commit to your work. How do we address those staff members as leaders or colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, that's it's a really interesting question, and actually it's one that we've been more engaged in with the schools that we're working with, about so for example, how does the class clown feel now that he doesn't have an audience, right? So, I mean, I was the class clown, right? So, and the only reason I went to school was to get a laugh out of my mates. Now I don't have that. So that is a really interesting dynamic. Think about that in terms of your athletes, in terms of, you know, where they, you know, like athletes in particular, I don't know if I'm pushing it too far to say, they can be a bit quirky, right? So they've got where they sit, they've got their routines, they've got all this manner of things. And when that goes out the window, the routine challenges, you know, the routine goes out the window, a sense of their self goes out the window. Everything's great for a footballer when they're playing football, or if they're playing great football, but what about when they're not? And so I guess it sort of touches back on what both Dan and Justin have sort of spoken about, in specifically, and Tom as well, talking about what periods like this do, I think, really amplify the positives or the dramas that might be in place. So if we've done that work, and if as a leader I know, you know, if as a leader I know that I need to go and chat with player X, because player X, I know that he gets 80% of his sense of self by being the larrikin, by being this, being that, and now he can't be playing that role. How do we bring them in? How do I let him know that he's just as valuable while he's working out on his own in his garage as he is when he's that guy who's boosting up the players around the park. And so to go to Dan's point when he spoke about being contextual, it's the context of one-to-one relationships, not just whole organizations, but really, it's understanding what makes that person tick, and then having the desire, I think, as a leader to actually want to know how this has impacted them. We make a whole heap of assumptions, and it'd just be easy if our assumptions were correct because we based all our protocols on our assumptions. But having the desire to really, again, that humility to go, wow, this is bizarre, man. Like, how's this playing out for you right now? And doing that with a playing squad of however many it is, and being okay with the fact that you may well need to have 30 variations on how, like Tom mentioned, of course I'm not going to be as motivated to go and do me, I wasn't motivated to do me strength and conditioning stuff when I was playing every week. Now, I can't get out of my house. So how do we let them know that that's okay, because that's a perfectly human thing, but here's what we can do in order to help you move on that? Because in the NRL, for example, we're going back they're back training now. We're back on the 28th of May if everything goes right. So how do we make sure that that's in place? And as I say, that takes that real desire to be malleable and be, in my opinion, be responsive to those players that we've got, because this is like nothing else. So anything we've tried in the past, it might be a good starting point, but it's certainly not going to get us past whatever this is.
I think to that point, Dan.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, go.
Sorry, Tom. You go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was just thinking there on, we spoke about vulnerability there and those kind of conversations with players. I think you've just got to accept that, everyone's in different situations in this space. But there is, like you say there, Dan, in terms of you can take it positively or negatively. I think if we're showing that clarity and that vulnerability that, hey, listen, this doesn't need to be perfect, but what can we own in this time? What can we make work in this time? There's so many positive things that we can go after. I was on with a member of staff the other day, just on WhatsApp, just messaging, and I just said, the world's gone into chaos. This is a world problem. It's not an Ulster problem. It's not my problem. It's not an Ulster problem. This is, worldwide. So let's just be vulnerable. I don't have the solution. So let's chat and find a solution for each individual, because as long as we have the purpose and the clarity, and I get that from Dan, and then I can communicate that down, as long as we can work within a framework, but we allow that flexibility and that autonomy, the buy-in that we get is huge in that scenario.
Yeah, I certainly agree on the vulnerability there. And Dan, great word of the use of the word larrikin as well. Love it. I really like the perspective there on just working out what people are missing. People's identity as rugby players for us is pretty strong, and for many of the players and many of the staff as well, but probably more so the players. Professional rugby player is a very strong identity, and as you say, that disappears at this time, and many of the aspects of what they perform as professional rugby players disappears as well. Whether it is larrikin, whether it is a strong teammate, whether it is ridiculous work ethic in relation to the people around them, those kind of things disappear, and the communication of that is tough. And it's when I talk about relating to those people and that becomes more difficult, if we have a group of 60, 70 people, it isn't possible for me as a leader to stay in contact with them to the level that I would do on the normal basis. Because on a normal basis, I'll come into work on a morning and I'll have little connections, little contacts with those people all day. I'm bumping into people in the corridors, checking out how they are. That just happens consistently, or now it doesn't. If I WhatsApped or rang up a player, the amount of times I bump into them into the day, that's going to be a disaster. So we have to go about it in a different way. And what we've done is we've set up what we call messy networks. So we have a series of networks where we tick off basically everybody in the organization through multiple connections. So it could be on a group WhatsApp. Okay, so everybody's involved in that, and there might be 2 or 3 of those. But then the athletic performance guys, they've got maybe 10, 12 players who they would chat with just on a casual basis, as well as maybe giving a little bit of advice while they're working in the background. The coaches will have a different set of 12 players who, again, they chat with on personal development in the background. So there are interlinking networks there, so that when we come together as a group that would include a player leader and leaders from each of the departments, we can do the head count, you know, because we know we have multiple connections throughout the squad. That obviously includes the player networks, which have been set up by the captain and the team leaders. That allows us to keep a check. It isn't scientific, it's anecdotal, but we found it's really helpful in being able to check up and make sure that the larrikin is getting his opportunity. I don't know what the verb is for being a larrikin. I'd like to know that, Dan.
So I jump in. I think we're all espousing the value of connections and relationships and being able to communicate and have conversations with our staff or our players, if we're a coach or a GM or a CEO. I think one of the challenges is that if you're going to ask those questions or have those conversations, to really listen to what people are saying. I think if a leader's able to have conversations and there's a level of trust and there's the person you're chatting to thinks that you're genuine, they might take that as an opportunity to really open up to you as their leader. And so leaders need to be prepared to actually hear that information, because once you ask the question, and if they feel that they're in a safe enough relationship or environment to then tell you how they really feel or think, you can't unhear it, you can't take it back. It's out there now. And so the challenge for the leaders is to actually do something with that information. And I think there's some leaders that avoid having those conversations or those depth of conversations, or even create the time and space, whatever the mechanic is, to have those conversations, because either they don't really care or don't really want to know how people really think or feel about their given situation, or they just don't value it or think it's important to the overall picture of performance. I ran a session the other week, and my first question with this group was, what's the one thing you miss? What's the one thing you don't miss? And so that's just an example. It's an easy question to ask. I think it's a low level sort of question to ask, but you might get some stuff that, oh shit, I wish I didn't hear that. I wish I didn't ask that question. Now I've got to do something with that information. And so I think that's a challenge for some leaders, is to have that depth of conversation and really hear what people are saying, really listen, and then be able to do something. I think it puts you in a great position to have the right conversation and then lead people in the right way if you're prepared, as I think everyone here is espousing, is to connect and communicate with your people, particularly in uncertainty or under a crisis or precious situation.
It's interesting what Dan spoke about when you're in the environment of a high performance team, you have those corridor conversations, you have intermittent conversations around food or anything. And what you tend to get is you tend to be able to get a general vibe of the environment and whether there's, especially if it's after a win or a loss, or you've come off a short turnaround, you tend to be able to get a general gist of what the playing group's like, how engaged the staff are, and you can act and action on it right then and there if you notice that something is possibly not where you believe it should be. But in the current climate, the importance of those interconnections that Dan spoke about, the messy networks, the trusting that there are going to be some staff members that have better relationships with players, there are going to be some players that have better relationships with other players, and how you utilize that to better understand how people are coping. Because if they don't feel safe, as you were saying, Justin, to open up to certain leaders, then that could foster into possibly some negativity once we do come back, and almost they lose the appreciation of what was trying to be done for them while we're somewhat disconnected. So that's a really interesting component that we, I guess, are challenged with at the moment. I don't know if Tom and Dan, you have found whether there have been any players in that perspective that, you've been aware of it, and and how you've actioned it, or if, Tom, you guys as a performance department are using possibly the wellbeing questionnaires on top of these conversations to better inform how guys are coping from a wellbeing and mental health perspective?
Yeah, we did make a slight change to the wellbeing questionnaires. So we added in kind of content. Do people feel content? Do they feel connected to the group? And we use that as a pulse checker, and that's not run through me either. So although I may look at certain aspects of the well-being and I may action those areas, it'll be another member of staff that will look at that, because if players know that I look at everything within that well-being, it's going to affect what they put within there. But if they know it's someone who they've got a good relationship with that follows up on that message or has a different personality to myself, then we're much more likely to get some good information out of that. I think the key thing is, whenever you do anything like that, is that people do follow up, as we've been talking about, and that if someone does, score a 2 and they don't feel connected, that's followed up with a phone call and there's a discussion about that. But I think to the points earlier that Dan made, you and Justin as well, you've got to want to help people. So there's no point just asking the question just for a tick box, or we complete well-being and therefore we're monitoring players. You're not monitoring players until you've followed through and found solutions within that. So that just comes from the purpose of the staff in terms of, do you genuinely want to help these people? Do you genuinely want to be a leader within your own area? That doesn't mean you're in a job title of a leadership position. Leadership comes from everybody within the group, including players as well. So I think if there's that need there, if there's that collective want to be better and to help each other, then I think you get some pretty effective solutions in that.
Can I just talk to Justin's point there? And he talked about the willingness to listen, and I get that totally. And one of the things I've noticed here is that I describe it as openness, and there is a difficulty now, or sorry, it's not a difficulty, but there is an emphasis on making sure that you're offering up openness, because when you're face to face, you can persuade people to open up to you, can't you? It's written in your face here. But when somebody's sat at home and they're not quite sure whether they should ask a question because they don't know how trivial that question is, do I bother him? Do I bother this person here? Being open about the fact that if there's stuff that's worrying you around this, ask the question. And that's the helpfulness around the network stuff and the multiple connections across the organization. If a player is worried about a certain thing and doesn't want to ask me, does he ask another player? Does he ask the person that's, or does he chat to the person that's monitoring the mental well-being or looking after them physically? And I think, I was at a webinar just recently that talked about these kind of conversations in hydrated and dehydrated terms. I really like that idea, that a hydrated conversation is a conversation that's honest. A dehydrated one is one that's held in bad faith. I really enjoyed that conceptualization, trying to work on how I can have remote and virtual hydrated conversations.
I think Justin said earlier about, it's a cultural thing. Did it exist before this happened to us? So good conversations, they don't end, do they? It's a consistent conversation. So if we're having good conversations with players, we've been asking these questions anyway for the past 18 months. We've been engaging on these topics. This isn't new. This isn't, why is he calling me? Or, there must be something wrong. These have come through relationships that are already established. And I think, that's where maybe people are struggling, that if they didn't have that within how they went about their work, their culture beforehand, maybe they will struggle now to connect to players, because those genuine networks, there's a genuineness about it. Those genuine networks just aren't in place.
That's probably something to ask Justin and Dan in regards to that trust component, because if we're in an organisation where there possibly has been a lack of trust or some lack of cultural identity, how do you actually try and change that in the current climate versus, wait till we get back and have all the players and staff there to try and set up the framework? Sorry, I cut you off, Justin. You were going to mention something. Feel free to jump back in.
Oh, look, just quickly, it's an interesting challenge, particularly for the AFL, with the coaching and the coaching departments having so many assistant coaches and development coaches at their disposal. And so to Dan's point around not being expected to get around to maybe 60 people, that's fair and reasonable. And I think coaches would rely on their assistant coaches who spend the majority of their time with the players to build those relationships and be able to engage and support and coach players on a day-to-day level. With what's happening now and the football departments are being stripped apart, even though some coaches from a style point of view do invest in relationships regardless of how many development coaches or assistant coaches they've got, some of these coaches are going to be challenged greatly when they come back because they don't have the resources to spend all the time with the players. And so it's going to be an interesting challenge for the coach now as to, do they value relationships? Do they value communication? Do they just leave it up to their assistants? Now they're going to have to play potentially that role even in a greater form now, given they won't have those resources at their disposal. In terms of the culture, look, I think now's the right time. It's never about waiting. I think now's always the right time. And so if you can get key people together, I think it's not about necessarily getting everybody together. I think it's about getting your most influential together. If you looked across your org chart, either in a football organisation or sport organisation or corporate, if you're able to grab your most influential and get them together and then, okay, what's holding us back? What's the counterproductive stuff? A SWOT analysis, whatever you need to do to look at what is counterproductive, what have we been tolerating, what will hold us back, what do we want it to look like day one when we come back together, and then what's our role in it moving forward. And the most influential, particularly if they're on board with what you're trying to do, they're the ones that are going to go back out into the areas of the business or the organisation to drag others along. So I think if you can quickly gather some of those key people together and start to have those conversations around, what do we want it to look like? What do we do now? And what are we doing currently right here, right now that will stop us from getting to where we want to get to when, we get back to some level of normality. So it's not easy, but it's not impossible.
Dan, Hazler, did you have anything to add to that in regards to the trust and cultural component?
I guess I'd echo what Justin said about the timing. It's in terms of if it's the right time, because I'm wondering, depending on where people are in their cycles, as you said, like in the NRL, the same things are happening. Head coaches are on 1 day a week, and football staff have just been stood down, and so in a coach's mind, I'd imagine, and probably Dan can speak more to it than this, but there's going to be a list of priorities. But and what I like to discuss is, well, how low is that people priority go? How low are you willing to let that go? And when you put it that way, I mean, clearly it's got to be the number one. But how you go and do that? So the idea of trust. I mean, it's one of, again, it's thrown around all the time. We can't have it without trust and those. But how do you get that back? How do you get that back when it's broken? And the uncomfortable truth with that is, some of your most influential people are going to be the people you don't want to talk about. They're going to be the people who you don't want to hear from. They're going to be the people who you'd be more than happy if the board or the club could just get rid of them. And again, that then comes back to that humility piece that I was talking about. Because if I am serious about stepping up as the coach that I say I want to be, or I believe I can be, and take this organisation to the level that it wants to be, I've got to be willing to go to places that I don't want to go. And only by doing that, I believe, only by doing that and showing that I'm willing to go and have a conversation when everybody knows that they're the key reason, or they're the problem, or we've got an existing, ordinary relationship, because maybe it's publicly disintegrated. Maybe everyone in the change room knows that we just don't get on. But if I can meet you and I can have a conversation which is predicated on learning, is predicated on uncovering stuff that I currently don't know or don't understand, rather than predicated on me winning that competition, winning that conversation, that for me is one way how we can, you know, we're asking people to trust us. We're asking people to, and I'm wanting to trust this person, but we need to shake it up, and we need to. I believe, as I say, be willing to publicly go to those places that people know we don't want to go, and have those conversations with people. And it's massively challenging. And that's it. Maybe now, I mean, is it the right time now? I don't know, because I don't know your club. But thinking of one particular relationship that I'm working with at the moment, it absolutely, this break provided the perfect opportunity to have this. It was this, you know, it's a natural break. It's a natural time. So as everyone's coming back in, and you have to name a playing group of X amount of players, then it's almost like, okay, well, let's have these one-to-ones as we come in. Is that hard? Yeah, but and over the course of a week, it's going to take a fair chunk of your time. But if we're putting people at the centre of our performance, I'm going to argue to the end of the day that that's going to be an investment, because you're either going to have to make time for that now, or make time for it when it all blows up. And it's up to you where you want to make that investment in. It would be my take.
I often ask, is it time or priority? Which one is it? And it's not right or wrong. Just be transparent and open. If it's not, if people isn't a priority, or culture's not a priority, then at least be open about it. Don't espouse it, but then not do it.
Exactly. Yeah, because that's worse, right? That's even worse.
I now do that at home. You know, I used to say to my kids when I walk in the door, I'm busy, I don't have time, but deep down, not that I'd say this openly to them, but deep down what I'm saying is spending 5 minutes, 10 minutes with you isn't a priority for me. And once I put that in my head, it actually shifted my behaviour.
Yeah.
So that time versus priority, I think, is a good one. And I often deal with leaders or, you know, business leaders, and they just say, look, we just don't have time for it. And I say, well, is it time, or is it you're just not prioritising it? And if you're not prioritising it, that's okay. Just be open and honest about it, so we don't get led down a different direction or path and thinking we're going to get something else and different. So that's, for me, a good question, or a good way to look at it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, can I ask a question on trust here? Because trust is something that is thrown out in the business manuals as being the most important thing, or one of the most important things. You know, whether that's got parts of psychological safety making it up, or whatever. But when I think about trust, there are different elements of trust, aren't there? Like when you go into work, you know, do you trust or not trust one of the people you work with because of competence?
Yeah.
You know, you actually don't trust whether they can do their job or not. And for me, if that's the situation I'm in, I'm finding I don't trust a player, or I've got to look to myself. You know, it's my job to help them upskill. You know, that's me. I look to me. If it's a motivational thing, then we got to look to the context and the environment. You know, is the environment that I'm a part of and helping build conducive to motivating that player? Is that player's personal needs at that time conducive to the motivation? So there's a trust on motivation that we can all work with. And then the other one, which I think is what you alluded to, Dan, was the bad faith. You know, are you just not getting on? Are you not clashing? Well, in that situation, you face it head on. You know, like you face it head on, or get rid of them. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
You know, you can't mess around the edge of bad faith.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I like the idea that you were talking about in different, you know, so we sometimes talk about that trust in terms of, you know, it can be predicated on care, right? So I might trust my, I don't know, I'll trust a family member with my kid because, you know, I know they care and whatever. But would I trust them to look after them for 6 months while I went away? Maybe a different kettle of fish, because the competence level might be there, integrity, reliability, all those kind of things. The psychological safety piece is fascinating for me, because often they're used synonymously, and I don't think necessarily they are. I think if we've got, and I'm not saying you think they are either, just quietly, but a lot of the time they are used synonymously. But for us, like in a psychologically safe space, a psychologically safe environment, I feel able to tell you I don't trust you. right? So and there's not going to be any there's not going to be any personal. It's not going to be held against me. I'm able to bring up issues of bad faith. I'm able to bring up issues of competence without it feeling it's going to be held against me, without feeling that that's my chances of promotion gone, without thinking I'm going to be next out the door. And that's a really interesting one, because do you have to trust people to have psychological safety? Absolutely. But can you trust people without psych safety? In some circumstances you can. I trust that person with somebody, but would I feel able to go and tell them I don't like X, Y, Z? Maybe not. So for me, I'm really interested in that, the synergy or the relationship between those two. What we find is that, I'm going to say most, but a bit like you, that I don't have the data, but we find most of our issues that we have, whether it's in a corporate room, a school staff room, or a footy change room, comes down to psych safety. I don't feel I can bring up the tough issues. And that could be a head coach not feeling able to bring up the tough issues because it happens to be with a popular member of the playing group, or it could be a 20-year-old rookie who doesn't feel comfortable to bring up something around, whatever, social issue or whatever. And it's that, it's just this. Amy Edmondson, who wrote that book, Fearless Organisation, I was chatting with her about it. We talked about it in terms of psychological safety is kind of like the soil in which you plant your players and you plant your strategies and you plant your processes. And you can have the best players, the best processes, the best ideas. But if you plant that in soil which isn't rich in psych safety, they won't flourish, they won't thrive. Whereas if you plant, using this word very broadly, lesser players, lesser ideas, there's more chance of them thriving if we're humble enough to be able to accept it when people bring up tough issues for us to work on. So for me, it's a very interesting field to look at, and we often ask lots of different questions to ascertain, the levels of psych safety. For example, to what extent do you feel that people on this team wouldn't deliberately undermine you? And you throw that in there and you ask them to answer anonymously, and then you show them the results. That's an interesting conversation piece. I'll throw it back to you, Selwyn.
It's an interesting one because the psychological safety component probably relates a lot to relationships and what you've all spoken about in investing time in people. If you're going to have genuine conversations, but you don't have the relationship or you don't have whether the trust there, you can say the right thing and it can be taken the wrong way if the relationship isn't there. But if the relationship is there, you can say the right thing and question someone and it's taken the right way because it's within the context of the relationship you have with the individual. And possibly if you... Yeah,
but also in a psych safety, if someone says the wrong thing, it's picked up there in the moment. In an unpsych safe space, so let's say it's an inappropriate comment, let's say it's a generalization, in a less psych safe space, nothing gets said, but then everyone goes and bitches about the thing that was said when the coach isn't listening or when, you know what I mean? So it's a really interesting thing that it allows for the wrong things to be said, but then picked up on and used as a learning thing, a learning opportunity. So for me, it's a really tapping into that and really understanding the power of psych safety. It really plays into this idea. It helps me as a leader not have to be right all the time, not have to second guess, because I know if I say something that's wrong, Tom's going to pick me up on it. And when Tom picks me up on it, I know he's picking me up on it because that he's doing it from a good place. He's not doing it to one up me. He's not doing it because he's after my job. He's not doing it because he's trying to curry favor with, another player. It's just that that's the way we operate. And that takes time, and it takes lots of little you can't just walk, you can't just walk in and go, hey, you know what, from now on, we're going to be psychologically safer. It takes a lot of micro behaviors, and it takes a lot of asking those questions, be ready for the answer, and then acting on the answer. You know, there's nothing worse than asking a question and not giving a shit about the response, or getting the response, it wasn't what I was looking for, I'll cherry pick someone else. You know, this takes courage, it takes vulnerability. Leaders have to be really brave to step into this, because up until this point, most of them have recognized that I've got this because I'm good. I know my stuff. And this is going back to what I was saying right at the start. You don't learn this. You know, you just don't learn this until you become a leader, unless you go on, you know, on webinars like this and someone prompts you to think about it. So yeah, it's a fascinating space. If no one's read that, or if you haven't read The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson, to anyone who's listening, it's one of my top 3 books that I'd recommend people jump into if they're interested in, you know, really stepping into the leadership.
I think at the end of the day, that everything you've just discussed there is a cultural thing, and I think that there's different ways to identify what sort of culture you want. But if you want to, you know, using the term that we're using at the moment, the psychological safety, and you want that to be a key part of your culture, well, then, you know, it's about creating an environment through leadership, behaviour, high expectation, reviewing, feedback, support, challenge, counsel, manage, you know, all those things that then start to play a role in ensuring that's, I think, Dan, you mentioned it's just the way we do things here. But ultimately, certainly in our model, an empowerment model, we allow people to have that ownership of what do you want it to look like, and then we've got to agree on that and then work towards it as best we can, knowing that we won't be perfect. We won't go from A to B in a straight line, but we'll still review with rigor. And as we build rigor, we'll build trust. We'll do it in the right way at the right time. And so we don't have to declare that we don't necessarily trust everyone right here, right now. We could actually say, listen, here's how we want to be seen. Some of this is a bit of a growth for us. We're not quite there yet, but we've got a plan. We're going to work hard towards it. If we slip, if we drift, someone within the group will identify it, and we'll talk about it. We'll adjust, we'll review, we'll straighten up. And I think that is it just becomes the culture of the group. It becomes the culture of the team or the organisation. It's backed up with leaders who role model it, influence, challenge others to live and breathe the culture. We recruit against it. We induct against it. We build it into our mechanics and our measurements so that it's linked to our performance. And then eventually people leave better off for being part of our system, because at the very bottom, in that bit you talked about, Dan, at the bottom, that's the behaviour that we reward. And what we behave in our organisation is honesty, is support, is feedback, is being vulnerable, is collaboration. We don't reward individuals based on individual brilliance. You know, we want them to be the best they can be, but they also need to buy into team. And so when you go back to trust, and, you know, we break it down, and it was used before. Dan McFarlane talked about it around the competence. So we often talk about competence, but also then character. And if I ask a group of leaders, you know, how would you rate yourself in terms of your competence in your role? A lot of them give themselves a tick. You know, they're not perfect, but they give themselves a tick. How are you going against character? And break that down. You know, do you put the team's needs in front of your own if you're required? You know, are you good for your word? Would people, when you speak, would people believe you that you'll follow through? And I think often the character bit is the one that is often a question mark for leaders, and that is often part of the growth, not at the total expense of competence. But I agree with the trust that can be broken down. What do we want trust to look like in our team? What does it look like? And then being flexible enough, it looks like this here and it looks like this here, and then having those conversations to support the delivery of that. So I think it all just comes down to the culture and what do we want it to look like, and then ultimately the leaders play a significant role in making sure that it's not just something that's words on a wall, or we espouse it but we don't live and breathe it, because everyone's looking at leaders for clues as to what really goes on here, what really gets rewarded.
Fantastic insights. Dan and Tom, you both came from other organisations into Ulster at a similar time. How did you go about assessing the culture of the organisation at that stage, and then implementing change if that's what you thought was necessary, or whether it was thought that there just needed to be different systems applied?
Well, I guess that I suppose that for anybody who's listening that doesn't know the context of when I arrived at Ulster, you know, the previous season at Ulster had Ulster's a fantastic rugby club with a massive legacy, and always has been. In the season before I arrived, they'd been through a number of problems that were media based, and there was a lot of, for want of a better word, downness about the club. When I came in, I had to do a little bit of a sabbatical while I was waiting for the Scottish Rugby Union to release me. And in that time, I went through a process of cultural mapping, which was basically trying to understand the context, making sense of the situation in the province. And I felt that I couldn't make any decisions as to the way that we wanted to go forward in terms of the culture, and in terms of the goals of the organisation, unless I totally understood that. And I suppose that was the basis on which I made the decisions. Or sorry, no, that sounds as if that was a unilateral. It wasn't unilateral at all. It was based on the evidence of the people I spoke to, the conversations we had as a group, and the amassing of that data and that information. And it was pretty clear. It didn't really need me to make a decision on what it was. It was emergent from that. And you know, I won't waste your time with going into the detail around that, but I genuinely believe that was the most important thing and the best way of going about that at the time. Without that understanding, there is no direction.
Tom, did you have anything to add to that from a performance aspect and I guess the physical nature of the team?
Yeah, I think if I think from an athletic performance or department point of view, I remember that, you know, I finished at Hull KR on the Sunday. We played a game on a Sunday, and I drove to Northern Ireland on the Monday, and I started in Ulster the next day. So it was a pretty quick transition, and I deliberately did a couple of things. I didn't research the players before I came across, because I didn't want to have any preconceived ideas about people's identity or what it was about. And then when I did get in, fortunately, Dan gave me enough time to take in kind of like where the department was at, how they worked, what the individuals were. And I found that very beneficial. And I'd say that probably took a good 6 months until we got a real handle on that. And in the meantime, I think I took the cultural identity that Dan wanted to instill in the organisation, or the cultural themes, and we just tried to build those with the staff, and try and apply it to our work. So we didn't really change how we worked, what we did, but we maybe looked at, right, okay, how do we reinforce these messages? How do we change the language that we use within the organisation?
So,
yeah.
And I'll jump in there. Like Tom did a brilliant job there in terms of his approach to it, and like it's really important when when you're the I suppose the cultural guardian or gardener, we could call it, the people that are helping you cultivate that cultural garden really buy into the idea of what you're trying to do. That requires a sell from me. You know, everybody has to be on the same page, and I have to sell that. And Tom, 100%, he wanted to buy. Like, so when he came in, for instance, what one of the sells is the way that we want to play. Like, we have a description of collective speed for the way that we want to play. That is directly related to Tom's role and what the guys are doing in the athletic performance department. Tom wants to know, what's that look like, Dan? So I've got to give him a description around that. So the early one is, mate, we got to be built for speed, and we got to be built to last. I don't want to get too detailed on it. Go away, come back, tell me what that looks like from your point of view. And we'll have had a lot of discussions along the way there. But it was Tom's willingness, and this goes for all the guys who are the heads of department and the staff members and the support staff. They're actually, that they want to know what is it that we're doing, what direction are we going in, and then give me some space. I'll go away and help them fill that space. And Tom's initiative around there was fantastic.
I think it's not to say as well, like the guys that were in place, the staff members that were in place, the team was fit, the team was strong. You know, it's not that we weren't built to last. It's not that we weren't ready for to play with Collective Spirit. It was more around just, okay, how does our terminology, how does the way we go about things further back up this vision, this purpose that we're going to work towards? So, it's not like, there was just great talent within the department already, which we could build off. So it's not like we were coming in and it was an absolute car crash of a scenario in terms of, they just come out of pre-season, the guys were flying, the training culture was brilliant. They had a great pre-season, they were in good nick. So it was just, let's start getting towards what's the vision, what's the purpose, and let's get everyone on board with this.
It sounds like, yeah, from an organisational perspective, you kind of have that growth mindset within the staff and the playing group, and then from your direction, Dan, just a common purpose and shared vision and how you communicate that down, then you've got fantastic staff, obviously, that are willing to buy into it. Justin and Dan, how, though, when we maybe are looking at reviewing an organisation's culture and referring it back to performance, if there's a lack of shared vision or common purpose, whose responsibility is it? Is it a top-down approach, or if as Tom said, that the everything was there, it was just possibly the direction wasn't? Is it always got to come from the head coach, or does it need to be a GM, a CEO that's driving that?
I think initially you need your senior leaders or your senior leader to show that they believe in the purpose, they believe in the vision, or your trademark or your values, whatever it is that you're espousing, and looking for the rest of the team or the organisation to buy into. So we would certainly expect the senior leader or leaders to absolutely buy in and role model it. You can't expect anyone else to believe in it or implement it and link it to their performance. I think that's one of the things that some teams, corporate or sport, can get a little bit lost in, is we've got this great statement, we've got this thing that reads really well, but sometimes there's a disconnect between that. People see it as one thing and my performance is another. And so it's about really linking it strongly that this stuff here actually helps performance. And so we're reviewed against it. There's rigor around it. And so I've been inside lots of organisations where they've got great stuff written on the wall and people can talk about what the purpose is or what the vision is, but they're not really held accountable to it. And I think sporting teams or corporate teams that do it well, people see a connection to the behaviour, the vision, the purpose, and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. They're absolutely linked to it and they believe in it, regardless of what their role or their function is. And that can come from the role modelling. It can come from strong leadership. It also, I'll ask leaders, how consultative do you want to be when you're developing a purpose or a vision or a trademark or a set of values? And hopefully they want to be really consultative, because that means they're going to bring more of the organisation in to have a say and have greater ownership. They may not allow the organisation to agree on the final product, but when it's unveiled, people will go, oh, I can recognise that. I can see that. I remember the conversations we had in our session, and I can see how that links to what we've finished up with. So they already have a connection to it. And I think that's part of the challenge, is to not do something in isolation as leaders and say, this is great, we'll now have to sell it completely to everyone. It's bringing people on board, giving them some ownership. And I've talked about centres of influence before. I think it's making sure that you've got your centres of influence, the productive ones, on board, and they can help you sell it and implement it inside the organisation and bring other people along. But I also think it's about bringing the centres of influence together that perhaps aren't on board, and being open and transparent around where you see them and give them opportunity to shift their behaviour a little or a lot. But making sure we're not allowing them to be blockers to what the purpose or the vision might be, and having strategies in place. And I think if you're able to do all of that, and there's probably other things that I haven't mentioned, I'm sure there is, I think that gives you the best opportunity to have a greater weight of numbers inside your team or organisation, all pushing towards and aligned to your purpose and your values, behaviours, your vision, your trademark, that type of thing.
I mean, to answer what you were saying, what's the leader's role, or is it the leader's role to set that vision in that direction? The way I might consider it is, it's kind of like the leader's job is to kind of like shine the light on the way, So and then and they might have a fair idea, you know, they might have a fair idea how they want to get there. But at the end of the day, it's not the leader who's got to get there. It's the people who they're leading who's going to get there. So that plays in beautifully, Justin, with what you're talking about, taking that consultative approach. And there's any manner of processes that you can go through. You know, I think the more ownership, it's like anything, it really is like any aspect of human behavior. If I give you an idea, it might be a great idea, but it's not your idea. Whereas if I can sit with you and walk you through, I know where I'd like you to be looking, and I know the kind of mindset I'd like you to adopt. And if I'm willing to sit with you longer than it would take for me just to tell you where to look and the mindset to have, if I'm willing to sit with you and work with you and ask you a series of questions and open up the leader's role is to, you know, kind of light the way, show the way, and then create a space for them to find the way. Now that sounds very woolly and very ethereal and lovely in theory, but, you know, I guess balancing the idea, that'd be my ideal world, and then we've got the real world, finding what that means for you. So can we spend half an hour more than what we were thinking of to make sure we've heard everyone? Can we have one more conversation about it? You know, can we give it one more week before we roll out our new grand memorabilia or, you know, merchandise with the new slogan on, whatever it might be, in order to make sure that this isn't just some bastardized version of my idea which is getting out, but it really is that collective. And then being adult enough to have those conversations with those blockers and say, okay, this is what the collective have come up with, you know, and you're not going up against me now, you're going up against your mates, and going to give you the opportunity. What do you need from me to enable you to step up to this? Because if you don't, mate, we're going to have to look at some alternatives, you know, and that's an adult conversation. That doesn't need to be a difficult conversation or a conversation we want to avoid. That, in my opinion, is part and parcel of when you sign up for leadership, you're signing up for these adult conversations. So yeah, for me, it's about a leader's role is to, if the leader isn't up being able to see the bigger picture, then I question to what extent they're leading to some regard. Obviously, there are times when you're going to be able to be higher up, and there's times when the ideal leader can move between. They don't always have to be out the front. They don't always have to be behind, up above. They're moving to where they're needed for different people at different times. And if you've got a team of leaders, you know, those assistants or whoever, then obviously they can play that role as well. But clearly, I think most people, most of the literature, most of the practitioners would agree that for the most part, a top-down directive of, hey, this is the new thing, can you all get on board with this? It doesn't usually pan out that well, usually.
Probably a great point you spoke about there at the end, and Dan touched on at the start about the situational leadership and being able to be contextual. And sometimes, Dan, you may need to be the voice if it is a really strong point you're trying to get across, or the shared vision. But then at other times, it's letting other leaders within the organisation be that voice and allow them to step up and show that you're not the only one that is kind of dictating the direction of the group. From Dan and Tom's perspective, how have you gone about empowering the playing group to drive a lot of those cultural standards? I know for us at the Lions, it's been a really strong driver, and I'm pretty proud to say that our leaders now drive the majority of our behaviours and values, whereas previously there was a lot of staff required to help maintain components. How have you found that with your playing group and the young and senior leaders?
I think it's a process. The squad in Ulster has gone through a big change. So we have a relatively young squad, and over the last 18 months, we've turned over a lot of personnel. I think the the question on how we drive the culture, the key component around our culture will be competitiveness, and this was something that the playing group wanted. You know, we characterize it as fight for every inch, but in the cultural mapping process, a lot of in fact, a huge chunk of the feedback was we want to be competitive at training. We want to be we want to bring back the competitive element and the passion to the play on the pitch. Which, if anybody knows anything about Ulster, if, you know, you got to bleed for your jersey on the pitch. You know, this is not a place where you can put half-hearted performances out on the paddock and expect to be lauded for it or even accepted. And it's slightly different like that, I have to say. And I love that shit anyway. You know, it's I'll buy into that the whole time. So getting them to drive that, it actually isn't persuading them to do it. They want to do that. All we do is produce mechanisms where they can show it, and then produce measurements to say whether we're doing it or not. And obviously then the modeling aspect of it. Geez, look at Eric here. Like the first clip I showed in the first meeting when I was there wasn't a try. It wasn't a brilliant piece of skill. It was a chase after a break from a prop, a young prop, 21 years old, who sprinted absolutely flat out 60 meters up the field to get to a ruck. You know, and to me, this was fight for every inch. You know, this was competitiveness. This bloke was going to hang himself out there for this moment in the park. And you know, once you've mechanized where they can share, you've modeled it, shown what it looks like, and then you measure it. You know, the motivation is already there, Selwyn. So these guys want to fight.
Yeah, I think athletic performance-wise, it's just involving them in the process. So if Dan's given the vision and this is what we're expecting, these are the kind of athletic things we need to be able to perform, then how do we get your program to support that? And you know, I think if you just open with players about feedback and you're honest about performance and you're honest about if you are measuring things, you know, is this this is where we're at. We need a solution to this. Therefore, here's our suggestions, but they need autonomy in their program as well. You know, they are motivated anyway, but you know, we can't assume that everyone's motivated to the same level. I think it's just from the language we use, the feedback that we asked for, and I do remember, you know, they really struggled with it. They really struggled with change. They really struggled with, well, what you just tell me. You know, it was almost like you tell me what to do. You know, well, no, it's not going to be about that. It's going to be about us supporting. You know, we're not. You know, Dan's very particular. We are support staff. We work underneath. You're the people that go onto the pitch. We're there to support any aspect, and we have expertise in certain areas. Our staff members have specific expertise in areas to help you, but you've got to engage with that staff member, and that staff member's got to come and engage with you, and that's got to be a relationship piece, you know, as well. And I think if they feel involved, like this particular time, we're not with the players. We can't dictate, you know, to players what they should be doing, but you know, they're gonna keep fit. So why don't you speak to your people in your position, your positional, okay, centres get together. What's a fitness drill that you guys should be doing? You don't all have to do, you know, I'm rubbish because I give them all the same fitness drill if I want to flog them, you know. It's so what do you want to do? Oh, well, we think our key components of our game look like this. Brilliant. Are they more likely to do that drill because they've come up with it rather than me just sending a piece of paper out with a diagram? You know, I'd like to think so. And it's certainly, I would expect it to be more beneficial for them as well. You know, so it's those processes. It's us being willing to let go of the ego and say we don't know what's best, but you know, at the same time, we've got to be standard bearers in certain areas. You know, if we speak about wellness earlier, you know, guys do need to submit their wellness. If you're not submitting it, I'll put it in front of you. Okay, well, that's our percentage. We're at 70%. That's not the way we do things at Ulster. You know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist for them to work out what they need to do in that situation, you know. So the problem is if that continues to be 70%, even though they know it should be 100%, that's my problem. There's a problem with they don't see the benefit. I'm not using the information, or they don't understand why we're doing things. You know, that's my problem, not their problem. It's shit. So
It's
yeah, they don't want to do it.
It's a joint problem, Tom. It's a
Yeah.
joint problem for the whole of you and all of the department there, because that comes back to the trust around motivation. You know, you got to look to the environment there, and it isn't just your responsibility. You know, we don't. You know, a player within this has got to understand that, and we help as a group to motivate.
Yeah, I think culturally that's it. I think if I have the attitude that it's my problem, that isn't just me that's thinking that. That's all my staff, that's support staff, that's players. You know, it's like Dan says there, it's our problem. You know, coronavirus is not, but in that situation, that's an Ulster problem, and therefore we're going to solve that. We can solve that together.
That's a fantastic insight.
In there.
Yeah.
Sorry, mate. There was just one of the questions you asked, buddy, on the notes that you sent out was what are the things you've learned from this? And I just want to say that in this time I've learned how much initiative people I work with have, and the reason is because they've had to, because lots of the stuff that we're normally doing has gone out the window, and we've had to bring in a whole new load of stuff, and all of a sudden things. I'm looking and saying, "Oh my God, this is like a well-oiled machine," and people are coming and say, "I've got this idea," or I don't know, I'll throw out a little idea in a heads of department meeting, and all of a sudden I've got people saying, "I'll do this." Natural space has been provided by this situation, and there are all sorts of people jumping in. And if there's one thing that I always ask from the staff, initiative. You know, and this has naturally created the space for initiative, and I'm loving that. Absolutely loving that.
Yeah, that's fantastic insight, and probably kicks us off to our last question too, all around that what have you learned and the self-reflection component. Dan kicked us off. I might go to you, Tom, next, whether that's personally or around the organisation that you work in, something that you've learned through this process.
Yeah. I think to Dan's point, just like the staff are just exceptional, you know, and we're not bothered where good ideas come from, and they come from everywhere. And I think we're very fortunate. And I think when we get back, I think we maybe take stock and just realise that we're in such a good position to push forward as a club, as a support staff, as a playing group. You know, I think the way people have handled it, like Dan says, innovated in this period. You know, I suppose my role when we do get back will be to be a custodian of keeping some of those innovations and allowing room for people to keep performing as they do perform when, you know, I get out of the way, basically. You know, I do see my role as, as removing roadblocks from people, but, you know, that doesn't need to be all the time. They're very capable. And I think just in this conversation here, you know, I'm just there to provide the context. I probably hear more of what's going on because I can communicate with Dan more often. I understand the long-term vision and maybe things that are coming up in the future, so I can provide context. But, you know, the solutions that staff have are just, you know, they're outstanding. And I'm not the best person in my department, the staff are, so I just need to find ways of supporting them and making sure that we keep harbouring that when we do return.
Yeah, beautiful. Dan, Hazel, do you have anything you've learned from this process? You've just got to...
I've learned that you need to unmute your microphone when you're about to speak. It's been a key learning. No, I think the having the ability and the agility to shift mindsets. So when you're working with high performers, they're used to being good. They're used to performing. So I'd imagine, you know, Tom is used to delivering good programs. Dan is used to running good sessions and turning out good performances, and you know what, and you know, Justin and I would be to some degree used to running good face-to-face workshops. We know what good looks like, and we do it well. And so when we go and work with people, our goal is to be good. What we've found has been really powerful is being able to just press pause on that mindset for a moment and shift into a learning mindset. So the goal of when we ran online conferences, when we've run our workshops, you know, using this medium, clearly, obviously we want it to be good, right? Obviously we don't want to be shit, but the mindset isn't about overly focusing on the results. We're interested in those results, but we're not overly focused on it. What we're focusing on is the learning we get from it. So to go to Tom's point, what are we going to keep when everything goes back to some semblance of normal, which probably is going to take a lot longer than people are thinking, but undoubtedly there are aspects of our work that we've done, there are aspects of the work that leaders have done, there are aspects of stuff that I'm hearing just the way Tom and Dan are talking that Ulster have done. There are going to be aspects of what's happened here that we can keep, because in some ways it's better than what we were doing when we thought everything was good. You know, when we were good at stuff, we thought that was it. But actually, oh, this is interesting. This allows that person to interact differently. That allows this to happen. Whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so, again, being able to say, all right, well, let's now take that. So for me, it's just been that ability to, be more agile in the mindset that we, to use, be really deliberate, actually. Because even though I espouse the virtues of growth mindset and, you know, I subscribe to Carol's work and stuff like that, there's still a big part of me that wants to be good. And when everything changes, being good is sort of taken off the table for the quick, you know, like, so now I really have to say, okay, well, how am I gonna better prepare myself to take on the feedback when it comes back, because it's not going to be what I'm used to. How am I going to able to adapt for when things don't go as seamlessly as I normally like them to go? I guess ceding control, has been a big learning in that regard, and it's been a powerful one, because as I said, for us, opportunities are suddenly, we're now looking, wow, we're going to still do this, but when you know the governments have sorted out what's happening, we're going to carry on doing this aspect of it, because it actually enhances what we thought we were already doing as well as we could do.
Yeah, there's definitely a component of the working more efficiently or working smarter, not harder, that I think a lot of people will take away from this. And as Justin touched on before, in a lot of Australian rules football clubs and NRL clubs, a reduced amount of resources is going to have to force a lot of leaders to be agile in their thinking and how they employ certain aspects of their program. Justin, from your perspective, some of your biggest learnings or growths in this period?
Sure. Well, it's something I've always known, just the value of being part of a team. When you're under the pump, under pressure, being part of a team, particularly one that's going to challenge you, support you, you know, when you've got strong relationships, a clear reference point for how the team operates. It's just reinforced the value of that for me. From a personal point of view, from a leadership point of view, I guess I didn't realise just how much stuff I could put in my head, and the information and the amount of conversations and the things you've got to think about. I'm amazed at how much I can absorb and still have an appetite for more. So that's been a bit of a learning or a revelation for me, particularly under pressure in this particular crisis. And the last thing for me would be just that we all need help. And your ability, and we've talked about vulnerability a bit, just your ability as a leader to be genuine and put your hand up when you don't know and when you need help. I think that resonates with people. And certainly I know that I will continue to need help, and I've made a few mistakes, and I've got people around me who support me and challenge me and straighten me up, which is brilliant. So that would be some of the things that I've learned over this last couple of months.
Fantastic insights, and fantastic insights from all of you around the context of the environments you're working in, but the shared insights into what you value as being leaders in your industry, but also leaders within your organisation, and what you find is valuable in developing high-performing cultures. So I'm going to leave it there. Really want to thank our four panellists for their time, and thank everyone for tuning into this. I hope I know I took a lot out of it and really valued the opinions and the thoughts. So thanks a lot, guys. I wish you all the best for whatever comes next, and look forward to staying connected. So stay healthy and stay safe, and look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, guys. Thanks everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks, Owen.
Justin.
Yeah,
Talk
thanks,
to you.
guys. Take care of
Take care.
yourselves. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.